Hi, welcome to this introduction to Brazil. So after we had a brief introduction of South America, let's talk a little bit about Brazil now, especially about the features that are going to be important to understand the patterns of biodiversity and how the biomes are distributed throughout the country. So this is Brazil. It's about 8.5 million square kilometers. So it's a large country. It's the fifth largest country in the world. It borders the Atlantic Ocean to the east, and many other South American countries to the west. And this map here shows the rivers. So it's a lot of rivers. That's an important feature in the geography of Brazil. It's one of the top countries in terms of fresh water available. Although we're not treating the fresh water properly, and so there are many rivers which have high levels of pollution, or also deforestation at the headwaters is compromising the water flow in many rivers. Dams also are an important problem as well for biodiversity, because most of the electricity in Brazil is based on hydroelectric power. So there's a lot of dams. You see some of them are here on the map. So some rivers are filled with dams one after the other, and that changes the habitat, and that has important consequences for biodiversity. Anyway, of course, the highlight of the rivers is the Amazon up here, running from the Andes in Peru all the way into Brazil, and then at the mouth here in the Atlantic Ocean. Well, in Brazil, some people call the upper part of the Amazon as Solimões. That's the second name for the same river. And then it only becomes Amazon after it meets the Negro River here. The Negro is also a very large river. And then the joint here is exactly the city of Manaus in the heart of the Amazon. So if you can see that there are several very long and large rivers to the south of the Amazon. Most of them drain from the Brazilian highlands here into the Amazon. The ones to the north of the Amazon River drain usually from the Guyana highlands, or even from the Andes. And then there's some very, those are really, really large rivers. We're talking about rivers that you cannot see you cannot see the other side of the other margin. From one margin, you cannot see the other. So like an ocean. In addition to the large Amazonian rivers, which we'll see in detail later on, I want to call the attention to the São Francisco River, which is this one. The source is here in Minas Gerais. It runs north, and then it goes here to the Atlantic Ocean. It's a very important river as well. It goes through the drylands here in the northeast, as we'll see later on. And finally, the Paraguay and the Paraná rivers, which join here. Here's the Iguaçu Falls, the Taipu Dam, and then drain all the way here to the La Plata region here between Uruguay and Argentina. Okay, so there's also an important, and the Pantanal is formed part of the Paraguay basin, okay, which is this wetland here to the west. Okay. Let's talk about climate. Climate is one of the most important, perhaps the most important factor in determining the distribution of species of plants and animals. So climate is a crucial factor. If the climate is not appropriate, the species cannot be there, okay? And communities, ecosystems, and biomes cannot form. This is like an overall picture of the climate in Brazil, usually tropical to subtropical. Of course, you have really hot and humid climate here in especially northwestern Amazon. As you move southeast, you get a little drier climate. So in the Amazon forest, you have really hot and humid. As you drive here into central Brazil, you get a drier climate. Usually, the winters are dry and the summers are wet throughout most of Brazil, except for the northeast. So in the northeast, you have the opposite situation. You have a dry summer and a wet winter. So we have this tropical zone here with hot and humid climate, not so humid here in central Brazil. And then you have the subtropical climate in the south and the southeast. And you have the arid climate here in the northeast, sorry. That's where the Caatinga is, and we're going to see in a few minutes. So this is the dry part of the country, right? Not along the coast. Along the coast, you have some really wet areas, but in the countryside, you have a really dry climate. And then finally, here in the south, you have a cool climate, subtropical climate that gets colder as you move south, of course, or as you move up to the mountains. And so in the mountains here, even here in the southeast, you have a cool climate. The average temperature throughout the country is 25 degrees Celsius, but it varies a lot, of course. The highest ever recorded was almost 45 degrees a couple of years ago in Mato Grosso, which is this region here. And the lowest was minus 14, recorded here in the mountains of Santa Catarina. Snow occurs in Brazil. It's not, in some places occurs every year, but it's not very often, and not many places have snow. So usually it's very rare to see temperatures below zero. But in the south, you can see that quite often. Precipitation is usually between 1,000 and 1,500 millimeters a year, but you have really high precipitation, especially in the Amazon, reaching 3,000 millimeters a year. Not only in the Amazon, also in the Atlantic forest, you can see areas with, in this region here in Bahia, of 3,000 millimeters a year as well. Okay. Topography. So in terms of, in general terms for Brazil, the highest point in Brazil is Pico da Neblina, the Neblina Peak, which is right here at the border between Brazil and Venezuela in the Amazon. It's almost 3,000 meters elevation, okay? The second one is also here, 31 de Março, March 31st. It's the same range. And the third one is right here, near where I live, the Caparaó mountain, which is 2,900, is almost 3,000 as well. So this is low compared to the Andes, okay, well, half of the Andes, but for Brazil, this is high, right? So 3,000 meters is high. You can see that in central Brazil, in the Brazilian highlands here, you see that although it's not very high, most of the areas here are at 800 to 1,000 meters. That's kind of the standard elevation there. You know, the Amazon basin, as you see, it's really low. Even if you go further west, it keeps low. And then here you have the coastal lowlands along the coast. You know, sometimes they get really narrow, sometimes they get more wide. And that's because of the mountain ranges here. So you have the Espinhaço range here, running next to the São Francisco River. So the São Francisco River is here. The Espinhaço range runs to the east of the river. And then here you have the Mantiqueira range, which is a small but tall range in the border between Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, and São Paulo. And then along the coast, you have the coastal range, starting here in Rio, a little bit in Espírito Santo, and then there's a gap here. But then it goes from southern Rio all the way to Rio Grande do Sul, to Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul. That's a really steep coastal range. So the lowlands are really narrow. So that gives you a really steep, and also blocks the rain that comes from the ocean. Okay. And finally, you have the Pantanal here, which is the really flat lowland area surrounded by some small mountains, and that becomes this huge wetland in the Pantanal. These are the administrative divisions or the political divisions. You see that there's 5 main regions, as we call them. The north, which gets most of the Amazon basin. the northeast, which gets most of the Caatinga biome, for example. But that's it doesn't have much to do with the biology. It's more like administrative. So the northeast, the southeast, where some famous places are like Rio and São Paulo, the central west here, which is mostly where the Pantanal is, and mostly Cerrado, some Amazon forest. Brasilia, the federal capital, is here in the federal district. And finally, the south, which is right here. Okay, Brazil has 26 states plus the federal district, which is right in the middle here, and 5,500, more than 5,500 municipalities. And then some states like Minas Gerais have more than 800 municipalities. Sorry, that means 800 cities and city halls and mayors and etc. And states like Roraima has 15 municipalities only. Population of Brazil is estimated as 211 million people. It's the sixth largest country in the world. 84% of the population is urban. That's a big change from 50 or 30 years ago. 50 years ago, most of the population was rural, but now most of it is urban. So there was a big migration from the small towns in the countryside to the large cities, forming large urban areas in the last decades. Portuguese is the official language and is the language spoken by virtually everyone. But there are 180 Amerindian languages. Many of them are facing extinction because some of them are spoken by a very small number of people, and so we have to take care for them not to disappear soon, unfortunately. In addition, you have a lot of German, Italian influence, especially from migrants that came in the early 1900s from Germany, from Italy, into the south, and especially the south and the southeast. Some small towns. A lot of people speak either Italian or German, and it's the second language in school, for example. And also we have the influence of the Spanish from our neighbors all around the border. Spanish is of course important and spoken as well. In terms of ethnicity, this is the data from the last census, and almost half of the Brazilians declare themselves as whites. 43% as multiracial or Pardo mixed, and then 7%, over 7% Black, small amount of Asians, East Asian actually, especially Japanese. Brazil is the second. Brazil has the second place in terms of Japanese people after Japan. So there's a lot of, but it's a very focused migration that went to São Paulo. So it's localized, and also and the Native Americans is they make a very small part of the population today. Okay, so let's talk about the biomes, the main point here. So this is the map of the biomes as seen from our perspective here in Brazil. As I mentioned before, there's a global view of biomes, but then there's also this regional view of biomes with some distinctions between what we see here and what we saw previously in global terms. So basically, half of the country is Amazon, all right, the Amazon forest or Amazonia. Okay, so that's this whole part here. It's Amazonia. Then the second largest biome is the Cerrado, which is in the middle here in central Brazil. The Cerrado has connections to the Amazon here, the Pantanal here, the Atlantic forest throughout here, and the Caatinga here. Only it doesn't have a connection only to the Pampa biome. Okay, so the Cerrado is right in the middle here. Then you have the Atlantic forest running from from the north here, like this narrow strip, and then it gets a little wider here in the southeast, and then it goes deeper inland here, and then even reaching parts of Paraguay and Argentina here. That's the Atlantic forest, which occupies 13%. Then you have the Caatinga in this area here, from this area in Minas Gerais, all the way Bahia, and then all the states in the Northeast here. It's 10% of the area. And then the two small biomes are the Pampa in the south here, going, of course, into Uruguay and Argentina, and the Pantanal here at the border, with Paraguay and Bolivia. It's the only less than 2% of the surface of the country. Okay, to give you a visual idea of that, I selected one picture for each biome to represent each biome. Of course, they vary a lot. They are not homogeneous. Perhaps except for the Pantanal. Well, Pantanal is not homogeneous either, but the Pampa might be a little homogeneous. The Pantanal is slightly homogeneous, but there are many differences we will see. But especially like the Cerrado has a lot of different ecosystems, different landscapes, and so we're going to talk about that. But this is kind of a typical view of the Cerrado with the beautiful sky. Usually the sky in the Cerrado is very beautiful. On the Amazon, of course, we have to put rivers because water and large rivers are a major theme in the Amazon, and also this carpet of forest, which is not as homogeneous as it looks, as we will see later. Also the Caatinga, very dry, xeric environment with cactus and sometimes no leaves at all on the trees. The Pampa, of course, a flat grassland area. The Pantanal, a flat area and flooded, seasonally flooded or year-round flooded in some areas. And then the Atlantic forest, which has a major, in addition to the forest itself, as a major feature, the landscape, the mountains, especially the coastal mountains, as we can see here, the ocean and the coastal mountains, and the mangrove here. Okay, so then later on, we're gonna look more deeply into each one of these biomes. Okay.